Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. In a quiet suburban town, nestled between rolling hills and tranquil parks, life moved at an unhurried pace. The residents took solace in routine. Mornings began with the aroma of fresh brewed coffee and the gentle chaos of children lacing up their shoes for school. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, shadows stirred, whispering of secrets hidden deep within the fabric of the community. It was a crisp autumn morning, the leaves a riot of gold and crimson, that Emily Carter, a devoted local journalist, stumbled upon the story that would forever change her life. Her arrival at the modest single-story home of Jonathan Baxter, a beloved high school English teacher, began with the mundane, a request for comments on the upcoming school fundraiser. Instead, she found herself embedded in a labyrinth of intrigue. As she approached the front door, she noticed peculiarities. An early morning newspaper lay uncollected on the porch, its print still fresh yet dusted with fallen leaves. The air felt thick, almost electric, as she knocked. No answer, only the echo of her knuckles tapping against the wood. A creeping sense of unease coiled in her stomach, urging her to dig deeper. Moments later, the door creaked open just wide enough for her to see inside. The dimly lit foyer was oddly still, as if holding its breath, waiting for the answer to a question that had yet to be asked. It seemed Jonathan was more than just a dedicated teacher. He was now a mystery shrouded in silence. Driven by the need for a story, Emily pivoted on her heels, her pulse quickening as she reached for her phone, knowing instinctively this would be the beginning of her darkest investigation yet. The victim. Jonathan Baxter was the kind of man who inspired devotion in his students. At Forest Grove High, his classroom was a sanctuary where every teenage angst was met with patient understanding. He infused literature with life, challenging his students not just to read, but to reflect. The glowing evaluation scores and accolades only hinted at the impact he had on the community. Yet, as Emily began sifting through her notes that evening, she sensed that this glow masked darker realities. Her research led her to interviews with Jonathan's former students, who painted a portrait of a man whose intensity could be both nurturing and unsettling. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only one that mattered, one former student, Sarah recalled, her voice trembling slightly. But sometimes he'd go off on these tangents, and you'd wonder if you knew him at all. Emily sensed tension behind the affection in those words. Each student's recounting brought forth nuance. Some spoke of their thrill in discussions sparked by Jonathan, while others hesitated, their memories clouded by unacknowledged fears. She noted a recurring theme, a sense of exclusivity, almost a possessiveness, which Jonathan wielded like a double-edged sword. That night, as the town fell into a restless slumber, a subtle shift manifested. The occasional look exchanged in hallways morphed into hushed whispers in darkened corners. Emily realized that Jonathan wasn't merely a victim in this narrative. He was an enigma man whose relationships were laden with both admiration and trepidation. With each revelation, layers peeled away, igniting a need to uncover the truth hidden in the shadows of his life. The next day, she would dig deeper, searching for those elusive pieces that could explain the distance that now loomed like a shadow over a beloved teacher's legacy. The crime scene. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of soft lavender, Emily arrived at the Baxter residence once more. The air still bore the crisp chill of early morning, Yet there was an unmistakable tension in the atmosphere. The local police had cordoned off the area, a thin ribbon of yellow tape fluttering in the breeze, declaring the home a crime scene. Emily's heart raced as she spotted the gathering crowd, curious neighbors whispering in hushed tones, each speculation amplified by the impending investigation. With her press credentials clipped prominently to her lapel, she approached Detective Mark Harris, a seasoned officer with deep lines etched into his brow. "Is there anything you can share?" she asked, feigning casual interest while her mind churned with questions. "It's still early in the investigation," Harris replied curtly, his eyes scanning the crowd. "But we found him. Jonathan was discovered inside, in his living room." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to hang in the air. "It appears he died from blunt force trauma." The implications of such brutality sent a shiver down Emily's spine. As the detective turned to brief his officers, she caught a glimpse of the living room through the open door. The space, usually so inviting, was now bound in an unsettling stillness. A shattered glass coffee table lay scattered in a puddle of crimson, evidence of a violent struggle. Emily fought to remain composed, snapping pictures and jotting notes while processing the chaotic scene. The ornate bookshelf, once filled with well-loved novels, was now disheveled, some volumes teetering precariously, as if they too had been startled by the violence that took place. A junior officer approached, providing a list of potential witnesses, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing inside Emily's mind. Each name stirred a new possibility. As she stared into the dimly lit room, a grim realization settled on her. This crime was not simply an act of random violence, but something deeply personal. All too aware of the ramifications of the truths yet to be unveiled, Emily braced herself for the storm ahead. The early investigation. The scene outside the Baxter residence buzzed with activity as detectives began their meticulous work. Detectives Harris and Rodriguez, seasoned partners accustomed to the darker shades of humanity, methodically examined the evidence. They moved through the house with purpose, noting every detail, while Emily lingered at a respectful distance. The commotion around her faded as she fixed her attention on the investigation unfolding within. Harris walked through the living room, keen eyes calculating the positioning of furniture and the scattered belongings that bore silent witness to chaos. He reached for a notebook, scribbling notes as he muttered to Rodriguez, who was photographing the scene. The picture snapshots of a life interrupted would play a crucial role in the early stages of their inquiry. "Let's check his phone records, see if he had any threats or concerning messages," Harris instructed, glancing briefly at the smashed coffee table that now served as a fracture point in Jonathan's life. "And I want to run down the students he's been in contact with. Anything unusual could lead us somewhere." Meanwhile, Emily was not content merely watching. She approached Officer Green, who had been assigned to secure the perimeter. Have there been any signs of forced entry?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the rising tide of anxiety. Green shook his head, frowning as he pushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "No, the doors were locked from the inside." Could mean the killer was someone he knew. As Harris and Rodriguez continued their investigation, Emily felt an almost magnetic pull toward the life Jonathan had led. What were the shadows that loomed over him? With each detail she gathered, she sensed the outlined figures of friends, colleagues, and students flitting through Jonathan's life, all holding pieces of this intricate puzzle. Returning home later that evening, Emily sifted through her notes, filling in blanks and connecting dots. Underneath the surface affection for Jonathan lay an intricate network of relationships, some bright with loyalty, others murky with jealousy and mistrust. Who among them would harbor enough animosity to turn admiration into murder? As she delved deeper into the initial findings, one lingering question haunted her. What truths lay buried like secrets in the pages of his life story? The dead ends. Days morphed into nights as Emily's pursuit of the truth deepened. Yet with each passing hour, the investigation seemed to grow increasingly convoluted. The thrill of unearthing secrets had begun to yield exhaustion. Her hopes for clarity were dashed repeatedly as she ran into tangled webs of contradictions and fragmented accounts from those who knew Jonathan Baxter. Initially, the students had been her focus. They painted an affectionate picture of their teacher, but underlying that affection was an unsettling discontent. Zara and a few others had shared fleeting mentions of an incident that had transpired years earlier, a moment that left some of them twitchy and evasive. Each time Emily attempted to inquire further, their walls went up like a fortress, blocking off the path to the truths she so desperately sought. It was just a misunderstanding, Sarah had insisted, her eyes darting away. An awkward silence filling the void of their conversation like rising water. Returning to the precinct, Emily sought out Detective Rodriguez, hoping to glean from him the kind of insights that hunches and instinct often provide. But as they exchanged conversation over coffee in the bustling break room, she sensed the same frustration mirrored in his expression. We have some leads, but they're not materializing into anything solid, he admitted, rubbing his temples. Interviews with Jonathan's colleagues revealed a few possible rivals, but nothing ties back to him. The inquiry into Jonathan's life had become nothing but a series of dead ends, and Emily felt as if she was chasing shadows, like a dog barking at an unseen threat. Even reviewing his phone records, she found no ominous messages or contact with people who raised alarms. Instead, it unveiled only the everyday communications that painted him as a busy teacher overwhelmed by emails and curriculum plan. As she left the precinct in a haze, confident that she was going somewhere but uncertain of where that might be, her thoughts skittered back to the living room the moment she first laid eyes on the chaos. A sense of determination began to crystallize within her. Even if the paths she had walked were wrong, she vowed to find new ones. And somewhere within those shadows, she knew the truth lay waiting for someone brave enough to coax it into the light. A break in the case. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across Emily's cluttered desk, a sense of resolve enveloped her. She pushed aside her half-finished coffee and powered through a list of names, reviewing every interview she had conducted in hopes of a new angle. Despite the weight of dead ends, a glimmer of hope flickered as she recalled a comment made by one of Jonathan's colleagues, Ms. Kelly, whose voice had lingered in her memory like an echo. In their conversation, Ms. Kelly had mentioned that Jonathan was working on a Projecta new reading initiative intended to inspire at-risk students. But there was something off in her tone, an uncharacteristic hesitation when discussing his passion. He had some interesting methods, she had said, eyes darting. Sometimes they made others uncomfortable. Intrigued, Emily decided it was time to revisit the school, hoping to glean more insights from those who had remained enigmatic in their interviews. Armed with her ever-present notebook, she made her way through the school halls, filled with youthful laughter and chatter, the very atmosphere Jonathan once championed. As she approached Ms. Kelly's classroom, the door stood slightly ajar. She knocked gently, peeking inside. "Can I have a moment?" Emily asked, stepping into the brightly decorated room that was alive with colorful posters and student art. Miss Kelly, startled yet welcoming, motioned for her to take a seat. "I know this is sensitive," Emily began, her voice low, "but I can't shake the feeling there's more to Jonathan's new project. Did it affect any of the students negatively? Was there anything controversial?" Miss Kelly's expression shifted from surprise to something like resolve. There were a few students who felt overwhelmed. They often looked to him for guidance, but not everyone can handle that level of investment. I suppose it can border on obsession if you're not careful. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Then, as if compelled by a hidden urgency, Ms. Kelly leaned in closer. But there was one student who really struggled, a boy named Lucas. He had been expelled before returning. There were rumors. With the name Lucas igniting a spark of curiosity, Emily felt a sense of clarity. All the fragments were coming together at last. The pieces had shifted, and for the first time, a sense of direction emerged. She had a name to follow, a path to pursue. It was as if the fog was beginning to lift, allowing her to glimpse the truth through the haze. With every step she took, the possibility of unearthing Jonathan's reality swelled within her, promising answers buried beneath layers of whispers and misdirection. The suspect. The following morning dawned overcast, a fitting backlight for the gravity of the task ahead. Emily couldn't shake the growing sense of urgency to find Lucas. According to Ms. Kelly, he wasn't just any student. He was a troubled boy who had somehow captured Jonathan's attention to the point that it had unsettled others. There was something haunting about the mix of admiration and trepidation that had surrounded Jonathan's relationship with Lucas. After spending the better part of the day canvassing the neighborhood and speaking to anyone who might have information, Emily flagged Lucas down to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The paint was peeling, and the sharp smell of unkempt trash lingered in the air. As she approached the door, a gut feeling warned her this might be the moment things took a sharp turn. She knocked lightly, and moments later, the door creaked open to reveal a disheveled boy of around 18th weight of the world, resting on his slouched shoulders. His eyes flared with recognition and something guarded. "What do you want? What do you want?" he asked, his voice low as he shifted his weight uncertainly. "Lucas. Lee Carter. I'm looking into the death of Mr. Baxter." The name seemed to hang uncomfortably between them, eliciting a flicker of emotion on Lucas's face. "What's it to you?" He shot back defensively. "I think he was important to you, and I'd like to understand that connection," Emily replied softly. "A few people mentioned that he tried to help you."
Lucas hesitated, shudders in his eyes dropping and raising in an erratic dance of turmoil. "Help?"
"Or control. He didn't just want to help. He wanted me to be someone I'm not," he finally spat out, the tension filtering into palpable rage. "I know it's fresh, but I need to know more about what happened between you two." As the rawness of his emotions surged, Lucas's guard dropped ever so slightly. The boy looked down, fists clenched, the corners of his mouth twitching. "He pushed me. I pushed back. Things got messy." The implications rolled heavy in the air, and Emily's pulse quickened with realization. Lucas was more than an admirer. He was someone who lived in the shadow of Jonathan's overwhelming expectations, prone to breaking under the pressure of it all. "What do you mean? What does messy mean?" Lucas's gaze suddenly sharpened, a mixture of fear and anger flaring in his eyes. "I didn't hurt him, okay? But if you keep probing, people will get hurt." Emily felt a chill race down her spine, realizing she had finally stumbled upon the crux of the narrative Lucas could be the key to unraveling Jonathan's story. Yet, here was a boy whose own fate could fall under suspicion, tethered to a life that was spiraling out of control. With the new layers of complexity creeping in, she could almost see the threads of the investigation weaving a darker tapestry. This was no longer just about the murder of a beloved teacher, but perhaps the revelation of a dangerous obsession that had culminated in tragedy. The trial. Months had ensued since that fateful day when Jonathan Baxter was found dead, and now the courtroom awaited the piercing echoes of justice. Wood-paneled walls loomed high, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation as spectators filled the benches, each person whispering their own theories and narratives into the fabric of the room. Emily took her seat among the throng, her notepad poised, ready to document the unfolding drama. Lucas Miles stood at the defendant's table, a shadow of the troubled youth she had encountered months before. He wore an expression that could only be described as a mask of resignation, devoid of the defiance that had flickered in their last conversation. Emily took a moment to study him, piecing together the fragments of his life that led him here, a young man wrapped in layers of despair and anger, desperately ill-prepared for the scrutiny that awaited him. As the trial commenced, the prosecutor detailed the evidence against Lucas. Emotional footage of Jonathan's classroom, reverberating with laughter and learning, was juxtaposed with the stark reality of Lucas's troubled past. Witnesses spoke of the mentor-mentee relationship that had fluctuated between inspiring and toxic. Tension thrummed through the air as the prosecution painted Lucas as a powder keg, fueled by resentment and rejection. But when the defense stepped forward, another narrative began to emerge, a different kind of heartbreak. Lucas's mother took the stand and recounted her son's struggles, the times he'd been pushed aside by peers, the mental health challenges he battled. She recalled how Jonathan's attempts to help had often felt more like coercion, urging him to achieve the unattainable while the pressure slowly suffocated him. Lucas, it turned out, had always craved acceptance, yet never felt safe enough to be himself. Emily felt torn, grappling with the dichotomy of Lucas's character. She had come to understand the boy's intense admiration for Jonathan, yet it couldn't erase the tragedy of what had transpired. As the testimonies unfolded, she watched as the jurors' expressions shifted, caught in the intricate web woven throughout the trial, a poignant interplay of grief on one side and longing on the other. The pivotal moment arrived when a key piece of evidence was revealed, a series of texts exchanged between Jonathan and Lucas in the days leading up to the murder. The messages oscillated between heartfelt advice and harsh criticism, each exchange tinged with an urgency that hinted at a deeper emotional conflict. They argued over boundaries and expectations, painting a portrait of two souls in turmoil, locked in a struggle for identity and validation. As the closing statements loomed, Emily sensed an air of ambiguity. The jury was faced not only with the question of innocence or guilt, but also the haunting reality of the complexities in human relationship. The echoes of Jonathan's laughter, coupled with Lucas's pent-up frustration, reverberated through the courtroom, leaving everyone aware that no resolution could erase the scars left behind. Days passed like seconds as they waited for the verdict, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. On the day it came, The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. When the foreman of the jury finally stood, Emily held her breath, wondering how many lives would forever be altered with the weight of this decision. As words filled the air, resonating with the heavy finality of justice, she couldn't help but feel the raw pain of both families. Their stories intertwined in a tragic dance of loss that would echo for years to come. In that moment, she understood the trial had unspooled the fabric of one life, but it had also woven a new narrative fraught with complexity, leaving questions that would linger far longer than the verdict itself. The aftermath. The aftermath of the trial settled over the town like a heavy fog, obscuring the once clear boundaries of right and wrong. With the verdict rendered, the echoes of the courtroom still reverberated in the minds of residents. Emily stood on the steps of the courthouse, grappling with the weight of the stories that had intertwined and collided, a medley of heartbreak and tragedy. Lucas Miles had been found guilty of manslaughter, a verdict that left the community wrestling with mixed emotions. Justice seemed hollow to some, while others felt it was the only logical conclusion. The decision led to a ripple effect, leaving college acceptance letters unopened and scholarship opportunities extinguished for a boy grappling with demons much larger than himself. Hardly the solution everyone had hoped for. As the days passed, Emily found herself drawn to the memorial site that had surfaced outside the Baxter home, where candles flickered softly in remembrance of Jonathan. Flowers wilted under the weight of sorrow, and vigil attendees shared stories, painting a complex portrait of the teacher who had inspired so many yet left behind unanswered questions. She stepped cautiously through the gathering, listening, absorbing the reverberations of grief. Then there were the discussions that had sprung up across the community, probing the depths of mentorship and the fine line that often stretched between encouragement and manipulation. As parents grappled with guilt over their own children's relationships and educators convened to reassess their responsibilities, a new awareness began to take shape. Conversations once swept into silence now flourished, with people reflecting upon mental health, boundaries, and the unseen pressures bearing down on the youth. Emily stood amidst the crowd, tentatively approaching Miss Kelly, who wore a melancholic smile as she moved through the gathering. The weight of Jonathan's absence hung in the air, but it was clear his legacy would not be easily forgotten. "I wish I could have seen it in time," Miss Kelly confessed, her voice raw with emotion. "Maybe we all could have done more." A wave of realization washed over Emily, beckoning her to pen a reflective piece that didn't just recount the tragedy, but also illuminated how their collective silence had created a breeding ground for such events. It would be a hard truth to reveal, but perhaps it was the only way to spark meaningful change. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows upon the memorial, she clutched her notepad, ready to capture everything sorrow, the reflections, and the hope for a better tomorrow. The pen glided across the page, each word rippling with sincerity as she attempted to honor both Jonathan's memory and Lucas's truth. This was not just a story about a murder. It was a story about humanity's beautiful fragility of lives, intertwined in a delicate dance. And as Emily poured her heart into the narrative, she sensed a shift within herself to a promise that she would not merely report the stories that lay before her, but also champion the ones that needed to be told, ensuring that the lessons learned would foster understanding long after the gavel had fallen silent. Reflection. As the weeks rolled into months, the ripples of Jonathan Baxter's death continued to influence the lives of those in Forest Grove. Emily's article, framed by the intertwining narratives of the beloved teacher and the troubled student, reached far beyond the cold confines of print. Conversations ignited, fostering a newfound awareness among parents, educators, and students, an awakening of sorts that filled the void left by Jonathan's absence. In the quiet solitude of her office, Emily often reflected on the journey. She remembered the vibrant lessons Jonathan imparted and the struggles Lucas faced in the shadows. The lines between admiration and obsession had blurred, and that complexity haunted her as she soaked in the stories from her community. It was a reminder that every choice ripples outward into the lives of others, shaping destinies in unseen ways. The aftermath stirred a collective call to action, resulting in initiatives aimed at fostering healthier mentor-student dynamics in schools. Workshops on mental health and boundary setting grew in demand, while the badges of shame that often fell upon Lucas began to be replaced by empathy and understanding. Emily felt a sense of purpose emerge from the tragedy commitment to challenge the stigma surrounding mental health and to amplify the voices of those who felt unheard. In the depths of grief, Emily discovered resilience not just within herself, but within an entire community. She would carry the lessons learned from both Jonathan and Lucas into her future work, ensuring that their stories sparked a transformative conversation that could prevent further tragedy. As she closed her notebook for the evening, she held on to the understanding that the echoes of loss can also give birth to hope.